Alright, gonna get right into it. Today, this video essentially explores the nuances of Claudia de Pondulac de Lioncourt. Her struggles, her entire existence, because I am quite sure there is no character in media quite like her. And it's not even close. Full transparency, our focus will primarily be on the 2022 version of Interview with a Vampire. Though I have seen both the TV show and the movie, I have not read the book. So keep that in mind. So to summarize her struggle, Claudia is essentially a vampiress, a salon vampiress in the early 1900s, caught in between the toxic and abusive relationship among her makers, parents, whatever you want to call them. I feel like in order to show how Claudia's inner turmoil shines in comparison to other characters who may have share similar circumstances to her, I almost feel like I need to compartmentalize her issues. So let's start off with her immortality. So most characters who struggle with immortality, they're usually adults by the time this happens for them. They have conflict with not aging, but not to the extreme that Claudia does. When this conflict is with an adult character, they usually lament not getting married and having kids and growing up with a family, or their family moving on without them and watching them do so. Kind of like what Louis and presumably other vampires essentially go to. It's almost a rite of passage for them at this point. Claudia, as a human being an orphan, she doesn't have that sort of tie. Her family is Louis and Lestat. She has her dysfunctional family with Louis and Lestat, and naturally she gets to a point where she wants to move on from that. But Claudia, being limited to her age and small body, doesn't allow her to explore relationships as much as she'd like to, especially not with humans, which is a big contributor as to why she wanted to leave and find other vampires in the first place. But even among vampires, Claudia is very small and weak, and other vampires pose a threat to her, as we see with her situation with Bruce. There's no amount of protein powders or deadlifts that's gonna get her on their level. And not to mention, she doesn't really know about covens or how vampiric society works yet, and she goes on to do her research and look into that. She was failed by her parents, and it doesn't help that Louis, the one who debatably cared about her more, was naive in these aspects as well. Throughout the series, we see her learn and make efforts towards education, like all sorts of education, and find out as much about vampiric society and going to a library and reading books. But through experience, she kind of sees what it is for real. But it doesn't change the fact that Claudia is perceived as a little girl to humans, and to vampires, she might as well be a little girl as well, in terms of strength and world weariness, not in romance. Like, I don't think she has a problem there. If she wanted someone from the French Coven, I don't think that would have been a problem. Hell, I think she could have pulled Santiago, but not saying that's what I want. Claudia herself doesn't seem to have a problem with her immortality. She just wants the space to be the vicious vampire that she was supposed to be, to have a place where she belongs and feels like she's wanted, the basic things that should have been considered before she was made. So I looked at a few examples of vampiric children in other films just to see how their situations were handled in their respective universes, and I found that there are plenty of examples of vampiric children in film and medium, but a lot of them don't explore the nuances of how their situation affects their personal relationships and sense of belonging. A lot of them are simply portrayed as monsters or hardly conscious beings, which sort of makes sense just because Interview with a Vampire could arguably be credited with being one of the first stories that dealt with the idea of something monstrous as a vampire struggling with their lack of humanity or loss of it. But first, let's go through a few examples of vampiric children that stuck out with me. First, we have Abigail from the 2024 horror comedy Abigail. For those who do not know, Abigail is a movie about a vampiric little girl who terrorizes a group of criminals. That's a pretty brief synopsis. I thought it was funny enough, and it does happen to be one of the last projects that English Cloud worked on before his unfortunate passing. But definitely a decent movie to watch on a movie night with a group of friends. This movie doesn't explicitly explore the implications behind Abigail being a vampiric child for so long, but it does implicitly, and we're gonna get into why I say that. So for half the movie, the main cast doesn't even know that Abigail's a vampire. So they treated her like a child. And I'm sure when she's out and about in the world, she's also treated as a child, probably some child prodigy in ballet. I suppose that's her cover. But if you look at the relationship between her father, given that she's a 1,000-year-old vampire, you would think it would be different. Now, her father is more than likely stronger than her, so there is some fear there on her part in regards to that. But there's also a bit of her wanting his approval, and I can't help but think to myself, a centuries-old being still wanting the approval of her father? Okay, interesting. And it is implied in the movie that her father is supposed to be protecting her to an extent, which makes sense because Frank was a vampire for 0.2 seconds and he was slamming her ass against the wall. So similarly to Claudia, Abigail is vulnerable to other vampires, unless they maybe are new and lack knowledge of certain gifts or how to use some of her gifts, such as her mimicry. Overall, looking at how Abigail has been handling her forever child situation for the past millennia or so, she seems very dependent on her father. Never really left the coop, and I think that's reflected in the way she interacts with him. At least with Claudia, she eventually became like a sister to Louis instead of being a daughter. She wanted out of that parent-child dynamic, which was something Abigail I guess she couldn't break out of for some reason. So her situation is nothing viable for what Claudia would want for herself. I think I'll even take it a step further, and I'm gonna headcanon if Claudia would get along with some of these characters, because I'm trying to give her a community, you know? I think Claudia would find a friend in Abigail, and she would encourage her to be a bit more independent. And I believe that Abigail, being old as shit, will actually get along with Claudia quite well, even though I didn't really see her maturity reflected as much in the movie. But that's just my opinion. Moving on, Sarah and company from My Babysitter is a Vampire. Right off the bat, this group of vampiric minors are 16, 17, so they can pass for an adult. Narratively speaking, Claudia cannot pass for an adult, even though she's only a few years younger than them. So there's a difference there. And on top of that, Sarah did not want to be a vampire at all. She tried to remain a fledgling and feed on vampires in hopes of finding some sort of cure. Unfortunately, My Babysitter is a Vampire wasn't on long enough to conclude the story for us to find out what Sarah ultimately did with her life. But I really wanted to include her because she is one of the few black vampiric child teenager examples out there. And Sarah is not unlike Louis in her regard for her humanity, but given the fact that she does have her peers around her, even though some of the human ones like Benny, and they might grow old, but you know, she has Erica and Rory. She does have a community around her, so her situation isn't quite as dire as Claudia's, her being both adult passing and having a little bit of a community. I could see Claudia tolerating the group that is Sarah, Rory, and Erica, but they wouldn't be ideal, and I only say that because they might not be sadistic enough for Claudia. Claudia, she takes a lot of pride in being a vampire, you know? She's already dealt with the whole woe is me, I don't want to be a vampire shtick from Louis. So I don't know if she's necessarily gonna want to deal with that again. Like, I'm telling you, I don't think she's gonna judge. You know, she wants companionship, so she's not gonna judge. But at the end of the day, she wants to do vampire shit with her vampire friends. Erica and Rory might be more her speed, but I feel like they're lacking a certain oomph. Like, Claudia had a very different upbringing from them. They were in very nice neighborhoods. They mostly hunt just to eat. They didn't have a full-on serial killer spree like she did. I was trying not to be too hard on her because she was going through a lot. So hey, I won't hold it too much against her. Last and not least, we have Jane and Alec from the Twilight series. Now, there are a few examples of vampiric children in Twilight, and we know that they're usually killed off because they can't follow the rules or control their appetite. But the Volturi, they're not as strict as the French Coven. They'll let you get by at like 12, 13, just not 6, 7. But Jane and Alec were essentially vampires born into royalty because they were handpicked by their maker, Aro. And they, on top of that, they were extremely powerful because of their gifts. All things that Claudia does not have. So it becomes a bit difficult to relate the characters because the twins were immediately given everything that, every bit of community that Claudia was denied. It's like the vampiric haves and have-nots. Like, I'm sorry you weren't born with a loving single mother in Aro, and the two people in a loving relationship couldn't give you what you deserved. I believe if Claudia was in the Twilight series and she tried to forge a relationship with the twins in the Volturi, it would be very reminiscent of the relationship she had with those in the French Coven. They'd accept her, they just might not respect her for obvious reasons, especially if she doesn't have any gifts.
What would you be able to then bring to the table if I'm already making sure everything else is sorted?
She gonna need to bring a bottle of lotion with her though, because apparently Stephenie Meyer's vampires are ashy as fuck. Moving on to 2 honorable mentions I have, and that would be the little girl in the beginning of the 2009 movie Daybreakers, who essentially walks into the sun after writing a letter about how she can't be a child forever. Then there's also the famous little vampire film, which I'm not spending too much time on because both mentally and physically those children did not age, and that kind of takes away from the core problem that we're addressing here. Yes, it is terrible, 300 years as a kid, but they probably did not have the same desires that Claudia did. So I'm like, And then they got cured in the end, which there's no cure for her. So, yeah, so Claudia's circumstances doesn't allow her to do what any of those characters I mentioned just did. There was no cure. Her parents weren't shit, and she didn't want to run into the sun. So I went back and cast my net a little wider to find a character who would more relate to Claudia. I focused on ones that are simply childlike in appearance but not in age, no matter if they're immortal or not. So some examples of this that stuck out to me was Sprite from Eternals 2021, Esther in Orphan 2009, Monster Girl in Invincible 2021, the character Rin in Cowboy Bebop 1998, and Baby Doll in the Batman animated series. And just to summarize what happened to these characters in their respective stories, Sprite was able to become human and grow again. Esther is killed because she's a serial killer. Same with Wynn. Monster Girl is a unique case as she had a de-aging problem, but ultimately her friend was able to make her a device to stop her from doing that. And Baby Doll accepts her condition and finds solace in a life of crime among criminals because when she tried to walk on the straight and narrow, she just wasn't given the respect she was due, being an adult person. And even among these characters, what they did wasn't an option for Claudia. They either died, found a way to start maturing again, or found a community that did not fail them. But very few had to go and manually make that community for themselves like Claudia would start doing towards the end of her life. And with many of these characters, I did notice a pattern of sadism, often stemming from not being respected in their day-to-day or taken seriously because they look like children. But I do understand the appeal of this juxtaposition in taking a character that's childlike, something that's supposed to be innocent, and making them a killer. Now, would Claudia get along with any of them? I don't quite think so. She's a bit too villainous for Monster Girl and Sprite, and Esther is not a girl's girl. She's not gonna be messing with it.
I hope you're ready to die by that dick. I hope you're ready to die by that dick, because I'm ready to go to war for it.
As a matter of fact, Esther and Wynn are a bit too sociopathic. Maybe Wynn and Claudia could find some common ground and not butt heads, but for Esther, it's a no. Baby Doll has the best chance of forming a relationship with Claudia amongst this group. She just wanted some respect, and old girl would probably look away while Claudia is eating people. So let's shift the focus over to Claudia's relationship with her fathers. So Claudia does become resentful of both Louis and Lestat due to their neglect and carelessness. There is some physical abuse, but most of hers is psychological. And it's funnily enough, in media, when a child usually attempts to kill their parental figure, it's usually over something maybe more material, like money, throne, a crown, power, or their parent is just evil and they gotta go. Whereas Claudia wants to kill Lestat due to his abuse, and she wants to gain her and Louis' freedom. She sees Louis, her father, is in this toxic relationship and wants to get him out of it. And it's a situation we see commonly in real life. When someone mistakenly tries to save someone from an abusive relationship, not knowing they're exactly where they want to be. But I feel this situation is rarely executed well in media, with the stakes being so high. My point being, this sort of thing doesn't usually play out as a family drama. It's usually two characters, parent and child, and they beefing. Or maybe I'm just looking at the wrong media and I need to find like a telenovela. Maybe the reason I can not find someone who would truly relate to Claudia is because I'm looking in the wrong genre. I'm checking out the supernatural and superheroes, when really I need to be looking at some Lifetime originals. I'm about to digress so bad that I'm gonna put a timestamp right here because I'm about to go into anime and that might not be your cup of tea. But the Todorokis and My Hero Academia is one of the best recent examples of a family drama playing out in a show that is not about that, with maybe the Lannisters taking the #1 spot. And it's always best when there is still love amongst the family members. Like, imagine if Dobby tried to get his mother away from his father and she wasn't budging. But nah, Dobby, he wouldn't even try that shit. He did not like his mama. He thought she was weak, and he was just focused on proving something to his dad at the end of the day. But yeah, if we're gonna have a family drama, it's 10 times more interesting when it's not just one parent and one child, and we're just focusing on the problems between them. I want the whole family involved. Add the mama, add the daddy, add the sister, add the brother, add the grandparents, add the cousins. But realistically, most works just simply don't have the time for that if that's not what the show is about. So I remember a really good fan fiction on AO3, and it didn't even have a plot line. It was a My Hero fanfic, and it was essentially about Deku finding out that All For One was his father. Now the story holds up standing alone, but if the author would have added a little bit of Toshinko, cinema. Two grown men fighting over a family. I'm sad. I'm here for it. Back to the topic at hand. But yeah, Claudia really gets it rough because both her parents aren't shit, and she did have very different relationships with them. She's essentially a child made to recklessly save a relationship. You know, Lestat is like, you weren't even supposed to be here, and Louis just didn't prioritize her as much as he acted like he did. At her core, Claudia struggles with finding a place to belong. Even when she's alone and moving throughout the world, she's still being side-eyed and questioned, which I imagine is a bit annoying. Girlie can't exactly be inconspicuous and move freely between social settings. And even if Claudia encountered and tried to join the French Coven without the liability that was Louis, I don't know if they would have accepted her, because her existence alone breaks one of their laws. And then there are a group of white French vampires in the early 1900s. Microaggressions would have been the least of her worries amongst that demographic. Baby Lulu was already questionable.
Wait, is this fucking play minstrelsy?
I don't know if there was really any chance of Claudia finding a group of vampires that she could properly integrate with. At least not one that already existed at the time, or one that didn't come from her own lineage. Lestat mentions there being about 100 vampires at the time during Claudia's life, and I don't know how true that was when he said that to Louis, but if we do the math, in Claudia's lifetime she met about 10 vampires. That's 10% of the vampires that's existing at that time. And this is how they act. And the ones that were mentioned in passing, like Armand and Lestat's makers, they sounded worse. So last and not least, I really do like how the memory of Claudia is played with in a very creative way narratively. So due to completely outside circumstances, Claudia's season 1 actress did have to be replaced in season 2. And interestingly enough, the show plays on how Louis is not the most reliable narrative. His memory is altered and fucked up, and he old as shit. So it would make sense that how he remembers Claudia in her younger, happier years is that of a lighter skinned girl who easily fits into the Creole phenotype, similar to himself. As for the years when she's older and their relationship is more strained, Claudia's reimagining is more of a monoracial black woman. Claudia no longer looks as easily relatable to Louis due to that distance between them and the strain on their relationship. Not to mention in the real world and in media, there's often this adultification placed on darker skinned black women and stereotypes like the angry black woman as well. Keeping that in mind, you can take the difference in appearance between the two actresses and align it with how their characters have changed and how their relationship with Louis has changed. In addition, the difference in maturity between the two Claudias is helped by the fact that the season 2 actress is older. And I do wonder if this was done intentionally or not. At the end of the day, Claudia really did make the best out of the situation she had. If she hadn't been executed, her and Madeline would have ran off into the night and probably started a coven of their own. It's even more of a tragedy because she was such a good vampire. Like, she literally dragged Louis' ass across war-torn Europe. I would trust Claudia to run a coven. I don't know if I can say the same for Louis. Louis might get, I don't know, caught up in the drama. She did what a lot of characters in similar circumstances to her were not forced into doing. She went and physically started making a community to really accept her because she damn sure wasn't given one. This whole video was a Claudia appreciation post, but that's it for today, and I may or may not see you next week.